Hello, friends. Jim here at Science Talk, and I have some research to share with you that examines what's happening to the Arctic soils as things warm up. Especially, we know that the Arctic is the fastest warming region on the planet. So, in yet another paper that appears in the journal Nature Communications, led by Anthony Lukowitz of the University of Ottawa, who's the principal investigator on this research. So, as the summers in the Arctic are warming up, the Arctic soils are beginning to shift, and they're now beginning to shift faster. In other words, there's slumping, there is liquefaction taking place. That's especially when you have unstable permafrost. As that permafrost thaws, the ground basically becomes goo. It's just this kind of like muddy, slurry thing, and it just starts flowing. Depending on the viscosity, will determine the rate at which it flows. So the warming planet is changing basically the polar landmass. We've always think of the polar landmass as frozen. It's not going to stay frozen too much longer. And the Arctic soils are slipping and sliding at increasingly record speed. Ground that was once firm is shifting. So researchers closely examined landslips and slumps on Banks Island in the Canadian Arctic archipelago and found a 60-fold increase in ground movement in the last 30 years. In 1984, summer temperatures accounted for just 60 events of the kind that glaciologists refer to as retrogressive thaw slumps or collapses of surface soil as the permafrost ice lenses melt. The ice lens will melt, the permafrost thaws. No change in state for the permafrost, but the ice goes to liquids, that's a change of state. In 2014, there were more than 4,000 such slumps, hence more than a 60-fold increase, more like 65, including about 300 in a protected area. On Banks Island alone, even under a relatively conservative scenario, this number could grow to 10,000 a decade by 2075 to precipitate as many as 30,000 active landslides in any future year. So, of course, what goes along with this is, well, let's see, what can we think of? Well, when you have this massive amount of sediments slumping and sliding, whatever, now you're starting to throw sediments into river valleys, into the rivers, starting to choke the river valleys and the rivers. You start to change the color of the rivers. You start to change the color of the lakes. 288 lakes have been reported to have already been observed that the colors have changed. And then once a thaw slump begins, soils once held stable by the frozen ground can go on sliding or slipping, and it is often difficult to stop, and it can become a runaway sort of thing. Now, what's this going to do to the natural ecosystems? We don't know. But considering that Banks Island is home to Arctic foxes, caribou, polar bears, wolves, musk oxen, Arctic hare, lemmings, ermine, it's basically a weasel, seal, sometimes even grizzlies, bears, it's obviously going to influence them. I mean, if their ground is suddenly like this muddy slurry, they're not going to like walking around in that stuff. So it's going to be hard to get food. What about birds? This island provides feeding grounds for, give you some examples, lesser snow geese, black brants, eiders, peregrine falcons, snowy owls, rough-legged hawks, ravens. What about those birds that are ground nesters? They're screwed. The scientists say a small local Inuit population based on the island can confirm what the satellite records are indicating. Ground slumps increasingly make it difficult to go hunting or fishing. Now, this study is certainly not the first to suggest that global warming is going to change the high Arctic, but it's at least putting some quantitative estimates on matters. So it's first to put firm estimates to the increasing scale of damage through time. The implications that what happens on Banks Island could also happen at the same latitudes anywhere. And now here comes the next big kicker. What have we discussed many, many times before, that as the permafrost thaws, what happens? Yep, methane. The release of methane increases. You have organic matter, it decays, and methane is the result. And you add methane, a potent greenhouse gas, trap more heat, increase the thawing, etc., etc. You're probably sick of me stating this now, but our favorite positive feedback loop, right? Geographers have already warned that what had once been hard ground beneath roads, buildings, factories, airfields, housing has already begun to slump to devastate infrastructure, even threaten oil and gas piping. I did a video recently, a month or so ago. We're talking about just that very thing, of what's happening as the permafrost thaws, what's happening to the towns where people live in the high Arctic. How the roads are buckling, houses are slumping in and falling down, and so on. So not only would it affect the environment, it's going to affect those folks who live at high latitudes. Here in Alaska, it's very rare you see, especially interior Alaska, where it's permafrost, you don't see people building basements for their houses. The houses are built up off the ground. My house is built up off the ground. I've got a tailing pad. I put Typar, which is kind of fancy tarpaulin. Put the Typar, put the tailing on top of that, packed it down, and then I built up post and pad on that. The idea is not to have heat from the building get into the ground. Well, my garage, front end where I drive into, every year I notice it's a little harder to open. I made homemade doors for it. It's a little harder to open the doors because the ground is sinking there. So I got some slumping right here on my property. As the Professor Lukowitz states, we cannot stop thousands of thaw slumps once they start. We can only make changes in our own lives to reduce our carbon footprint. We can encourage our politicians to take the necessary measures to help reduce our greenhouse emissions so that future warming is as limited as possible. But like anything else, there's always the lag time. There's always that lag time due to the inertia in the system that once you get it going, it's awfully difficult to slow it down or stop it. So what this report is basically telling us is that the landmass of the Arctic is changing. Ground is slumping, in many locations, and that's going to have major implications. Be it what it does to ecosystems, human habitation, methane levels, you name it. So I want to bring you that report, and thank you for your time. Hey friends, this is Jim reminding you to subscribe and share my videos. Also, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I drop a video in. And I'm also asking for you to please support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your continued support.